Greetings, ghouls and ghoulettes. It's your old fiend Corey from the Twin Ports Horror Society. This evening, we are joined by local author Chance Fortune. He is here today to tell us about his upcoming release, In the Web of the Spider Queen. Chance, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with when does this book come out? Where can people get it? And then tell us a little bit of a spoiler-free synopsis to get them hooked into wanting to go and buy this motherfucker.
Okay, yeah, so the book comes out May 1st. We're just over a week away from the official release of the book. It'll be available on Amazon to start. You'll be able to get it for you Kindle readers. You'll be able to get it with your Kindle Unlimited plan for free if you have that plan. So if you're an ebook type person, I suggest getting Kindle Unlimited. That'll get you free access to the book because it's on the Kindle Unlimited program. If you're not Kindle subscriber, you can still buy it for right now. Its pre-order price is $2.99. So if you want to get it early while the pre-order price is low, I'd say do that because the price does go up on May 1st to $5.99. It'll also be available in paperback the same day on Amazon, and then after about a month, it'll be released on Barnes & Noble. So if you're not an Amazon person, you don't want to give Bezos any more of your money, you'll also be able to find it on Barnes & Noble. Also working on getting it into some local bookstores. You can also get a copy directly from me from my website, authorchancefortune.com. I'm going to have copies available for sale. The markup on the copies at my website is a little bit more, but you also get more with the book. You're going to get some special deals, some special merchandise that goes along with the book, bookmarks, postcards, things like that. So, and it's also going to be signed by me. So if, in the event that my signature becomes worth something someday, you're going to have that early on.
Excellent. So why don't we tell everybody a little bit about the book?
Yeah, so In the Web of the Spider Queen, it's sort of a folk horror story, a little bit of a cult horror. It's kind of a mix of horror genres into one book. I'm a big fan of all the genres. So when I wrote this book, there's a lot of things from various things that I pulled into it, that I was always a fan of seeing in my horror books. So this was my chance to kind of write the horror book that I always wanted to read. So the basic plot synopsis is a family from the Twin Cities, from the Minneapolis area. It's kind of a city family. They decide they're going to leave the city for the small town Minnesota life, the quiet countryside life. So they move to a small town about southwest Minnesota, kind of off the beaten trail, by a farmhouse out there. Things quickly turn bad for them after a horrible accident kind of spirals them down a really bad path. They start finding out the town isn't quite what it seems. And then as the father, the mother, and the daughters are kind of individually unraveling the town's secrets, they find out some things that they shouldn't find out, and the townsfolk are not too happy about that. So, if you're from small town Minnesota or any small town across the United States, you know that those places can be a little bit sketchy sometimes.
Definitely. Well, what were some of your influences for the locations, since it is, takes place in Minnesota and you are from Minnesota?
Yeah, I'm from Minnesota, and if you read the book, you can clearly tell that this is written by somebody who knows Minnesota. This is somebody who's been in Minnesota their entire life. So obviously I grew up in a small town. I grew up not too far from the Iron Range in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. So it wouldn't be fair to say that Rapids was a big inspiration. Rapids isn't that small of a town anymore. It's 10,000 people, which is comparatively small to Duluth, for example. But when you compare it to real small towns in Minnesota, it's not even close to the same thing. So I guess I base it somewhat off of some range cities. There's a city up near the range called Bovee that is basically it's been cut off from the rest of the state because of the highway. You have to go off the highway to get to it. The highway won't take you through Bovee. So Bovee has become kind of a ghost town over the last few years. People are leaving because there's no opportunities there. It's kind of just got a creepy feel to it. There's another town that I drive through when I go hunting every year, and it's the same thing. Very, very small town, but there's always that one church in town, and that's the nicest building of all the buildings is that one church. There's as far as cult city Minnesota goes, there's a city down in kind of southwest Minnesota area, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but it's, if you look at like internet viral videos, it's kind of been called Cult Town, Minnesota, because of the creepy Scandinavian style architecture and the all white buildings with the big wide glass windows. And nobody's ever seen there. Like, people drive through and there's never anybody like out mowing their lawn or anything like that. It's a very unsettling driving experience to go through there. I haven't been through there myself. I've just watched a lot of viral videos on that. So that's mainly the inspiration for the town. The farmhouse that the family buys is actually based off of my grandparents' farmhouse, their barn, their pasture, things like that. So a place I spent a lot of time as a kid that I remember in pretty great detail. So I was able to take the property and base the property on that. The house itself is out of my own imagination, but.
Nice. So, and this is your first novel, right? Your first full-length,
Yeah, first
big-ass book, right?
First published novel, yeah. I wrote another book just before I enrolled in college, because I've always wanted to be a writer, to be a novelist, and so I wrote another book that was more in the vein of like a Tom Clancy action thriller type book, and I got done with it and started reading through it, and it was just the cheesiest, like, written by somebody who clearly doesn't know how like the world works at the time, because I was just before getting into college, so somebody who still didn't fully understand how the world works and was writing about things that were way beyond their ability to write about, and make it believable. So I got through a draft of that, and I read it, and I was like getting ready to edit it, and right away I could tell like this is not good. So I scrapped that. I think there's a manuscript of that somewhere that I found recently, but I won't reopen it. That's done. So this is my first, this is after school, after finishing my degree, getting some miles under my belt as far as like writing goes, and then finally deciding, okay, it's time to work on this. And this was over the course of 3 years. I wrote this book because it was my first book, and I did take a lot of time on it. Working on my second book right now, and I'm more than cut that time in half because of all the lessons I learned from this book.
So let's talk about the publishing process. What did you have to go through to get this book from something that you wrote on your laptop or in a notebook to to this in my hands right here?
Yeah. So there's a couple different ways you can go about publishing these days, and thank God for social media and the internet, because it's really made it more accessible for people to become authors and to release books. So obviously there's still the traditional route of publishing, right? Which is you go through an agent, right? So the traditional publishing, everybody thinks outside the author world, everybody thinks that traditional publishing is you send your book to a publisher and they read it and they like, oh, we like your book, we don't like your book, we're gonna publish it. Actually, you don't even get to the publisher as an author. You don't even get to talk to the publisher. You got to go through an agent. So first you got to find an agent who's willing to represent your book. And that can take forever because writing, as we film and books and all that stuff, TV, is so subjective. So finding that person who's going to like your book the way you like your book, or who believes enough in your book that they can sell it, can be really difficult because there's a lot of agents out there. And as far as horror is concerned, like, not a lot of agents that represent horror. So horror is kind of a difficult genre. It's a really popular genre, so you would think there's more agents representing it, but there's not. There's very few. So finding an agent that represents horror is a huge task. And I actually spent a pretty good amount of time, at least a year, I think, trying to just find an agent that could represent horror to the publishers. And that, after, I don't know, more than 10 query letters that I sent, it just was starting to become very obvious to me that this was going to be a task. And if I wanted this book to be released in a timely way, I was just going to have to take the reins and do it myself. Luckily, the industry around self-publishing has changed, and the attitude around self-publishing has changed a lot. It's almost gotten a complete rebrand, from self-publishing now, it's indie authoring. And the reason for that is because of companies like Amazon, Barnes and Noble have kind of taken the lead and said, we're going to publish books now. We're not just going to be distributors of books. We're going to be publishers of books, because it benefits them, because they add more product to their shelves. That is, they're cutting out the middleman, the publisher. And there's a lot of authors out there who have a lot of really unique voices and unique stories to tell. And sometimes really good authors don't make it through the filter of an agent and then the secondary filter of a publisher. But having that author who can just send his stuff right to Amazon or at Barnes and Noble will look through it, make sure that it is a legitimate book. And then they say, we'll publish this, and here's your commission you're going to get. And it's usually better commission than you would get from a publisher. It's usually a lot better. Plus, as an indie author like myself, you get to maintain complete creative control. So like if you hold that book up, the cover design, was collaborative between me and my brother. The back matter, everything interior was me formatting myself. So I get to hold all the creative control over that. Yeah. So like all that was my brother and me. It's collaborative design. I told him what I wanted, specifically what I wanted, and he did it for me. So it really makes a huge difference in the final product when you as the author gets to have the final control, and your vision gets to be shown all the way through. Whereas when you go traditional publishing route, you lose that kind of control. Even the content of the book itself, like you lose control over it. The publisher was like, well, we just don't think that this is going to sell well, or this is going to be marketable to this demographic. So we want to tweak and change some things. And sometimes those changes are valid, and sometimes they get so far away from what your original intention was. So I'm not upset that I indie published this book. Do I want a traditional publish in the future for certain projects? Yeah, indie publishing is a lot of work, and if you're going to do this for the long run, it might be helpful to be a traditional published author. But if you've got the work ethic and you've got the creative energy, indie publishing is a great route, and it's a legitimate route. I think the attitude about that has changed significantly. That's a really long answer to a very simple question. I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's good. That's the kind of stuff people like to know, because that they think, how does this happen? How does somebody in town get a book from point A to point B?
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about some of the other, like, what other types of writing and stuff did you do before you ended up with this book? I do have one thing here that you were involved in too, that Keith Tyler Hopkins had just put together.
Yeah.
And it's the attack of the Lucon zombies. My friend Jerry gifted me this book. I haven't got to flip through this one yet, but there's a lot of different local people in there. So how did you get involved in that? And then any other other things that you did leading up to this book, websites, or just anything else you did writing for, if you want to talk about it.
Yeah. On that note, just give me 1 quick second. So I do, I've done a few short stories here. I've done a handful of short stories. I also was involved in last year's issue. Is that popping up for me? Twin Ports Horror Society.
Oh, yep.
Twin Ports Terror. Sorry.
I can see some of it popped up. I wonder, I might have a copy sitting here too, but I think, yes, it's coming and going. Okay, so I kind of spaced that out because I actually have something in there as well too. So that's
Sorry, Twin Ports Terror magazine. You're the Horror Society.
Yes.
There's no shortage of horror fans in the Twin Ports, which is amazing especially if you're a horror writer. So the Twin Ports Terror, I'll just start there because it was first. That one was a submission based. I missed the first magazine because I was so in the weeds with Spider Queen at the time that I just didn't have the creative energy to lend to writing a short story for the magazine. So when the second issue came around, I think I was waiting on my editor for Spider Queen to get back to me with like their notes and their edits for Spider Queen. So it gave me some time to like write a short story for Twin Ports Terror. And so that's, I submitted a story to them, and actually it's if you guys are interested, it's a soft tie-in with Spider Queen. It works as sort of like a sequel. There's little subtle references to the events of Spider Queen in it. And the ending is very much in the same vein as Spider Queen. So if you guys read Spider Queen and you're like, I want more of this, I want to know what happens next, you can pick up, find a copy of Twin Ports Terror, and you can kind of find out what happens next. Different characters, different setting, but it's definitely they're one and the same story. The other one, Keith's book, was Invite. So I was, let's see, I was overseas in the Middle East at the time, and I saw that Keith was doing this, and Keith and I are always talking back and forth about stuff. And he invited me to submit a story, and he actually was really cool about it because like I was super busy at the time, and I had a lot going on, so I kept missing the deadline. And Keith kept giving me more time to do it, and finally I found time to sit down and like for a couple days and write the story, and and I did 3 drafts of it, which is for me that's usually kind of short, and I was a little nervous, so I sent it to Keith to say, hey, this is what I had time to write. What do you think? And he actually loved it and put it in the book, so I'm really flattered by that, and I appreciate him giving me the opportunity to continue sharing my short stories as well as my longer fiction. So that's the story about that.
Where is that one available? I haven't talked to Keith actually since this came out. I've done a couple interviews with him before, but I'm not exactly sure where people can get this one right now.
Yeah, it's on Barnes and Noble. And since we're promoting, since I'm here to plug my website, I'll just let you guys know I have a link to Keith's book on my website since I'm involved in it. If you go to my website, again, that's authorchancefortune.com, and you go to bibliography, you'll see a link to Keith's book, and you can follow that link, and it'll take you to the Barnes and Noble checkout.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll put your link on the bottom with the magic computer editing as well too, so people know where to go for that. So you're already starting up your another book. So is this one horror as well, or have you moved back into action or anything else?
Well, so I mean, and you kind of probably noticed this in Spider Queen. There's always those dabbles of action. Spider Queen has its little splashes of action. Writing action was never my problem. It was content and like the writing about geopolitical stuff was my issue. That's why I scrapped that book. Writing action was never really an issue for me, and so even in Spider Queen, there are some pretty action-packed scenes. Probably more action than you're used to seeing in a horror story. But so as far as the next book is concerned, it is horror, but it's closer, I think, to dark fantasy. So one other thing that I kind of did a lot in Spider Queen was it's a horror book, but there's definitely elements of dark fantasy there,
Yeah.
especially towards the end. It really leans heavy into dark fantasy towards the end, and I just like that crossover of those genres, and to me those genres are just kind of two sides of the same coin. So the new book is kind of it's like I'm flipping the coin with the new book where it's dark fantasy, but there's splashes of really intense horror. So yeah, I'm taking the same horror and tension building that I do in Spider Queen, and I applied to this dark fantasy setting. And that book I'm hoping will be released next year. It's going to all depend because I'm going to have to go through the query process for agents again, and I'm hoping that this book, because it is more on the fantasy side, is a little bit more approachable for agents. So that's my goal with that one. But yeah, if you guys like this book, please, you'll like the new one. It's done in the same vein. It's still my writing voice. And there are some tie-ins with Spider Queen again, because
nice.
I am a big shared universe guy. I like when movies and books are set in a shared universe. I think all my favorite writers do that. They, R.L. Stine, Stephen King, just lots of horror authors are known for doing these shared universe books, and I am no exception. Spider Queen kind of being my launching point. Everything kind of branches off of that. Even the standalone books are going to have subtle nods to the events of Spider Queen, because something like that happens. When you read the book and you'll understand, when something like this happens, it has a ripple effect. If everything is set in the same world, something like what happens in Spider Queen, it ripples throughout the whole world.
Nice. Yeah, that's cool to see. That you're ambitious enough to kind of keep going and exploring that spider web. That's really cool. And
Sometimes it's not intentional. Sometimes it's just I get to a point in something I'm working on, and I think, God, wouldn't it be really cool if like so and so from Spider Queen pops up right here? You know.
nice. And kind of going back to what you're saying too, mixing the genres. I think that's one of a lot of people's favorite thing about horror is you can splash it into really anything and it works. I mean, action, dark fantasy, comedy. I mean, it works on any level because, well, for many different reasons. So that's great to see that you're not just trying to take one lane with it either too.
Yeah, and within horror, there's so many subgenres of horror. I belong to a books of horror group on Facebook, and I'm always getting book recommendations through that group, and it's a great group. It's probably one of the most like friendly group. Horror groups always tend to be the most friendly that I belong to. It's weird. Like Twin Ports Horror Society is super friendly. This is no exception. Like everybody in there is just super chill. But I get a lot of recommendations for just all kinds of different books, and they're all horror, but they're all so different and unique, and that's what I really love about the genre.
Nice. So what are some of your how did you get into horror? Where did that fascination begin, and how did those influences lead into your writing?
Yeah, well, I think you already had my brother on a few months ago, and he may have told this story. And my story is not going to be very much different. In fact,
okay.
When I listened to his interview, I was like, I think you just stole my story. Like
I was kind of wondering how some of that would tie in, so I was curious to hear before I directly asked. But go ahead.
Well, we stayed. We would stay a lot with our grandma over the weekends, and our uncle, who was a big horror fanatic, who stayed in the upstairs loft in the duplex that they had. And he had a pretty massive horror collection, a pretty big collection of horror movies. So I would, on the weekend, I'd go up there and I'd borrow a movie. It was like what the movie of the week kind of thing. Like, it was kind of like my own personal like blockbuster and for horror. And I'd bring it downstairs and I'd stay up super late because my grandma would go to sleep right away, and I'd stay up in the living room and put a movie on. And so I got pretty early access to a lot of different horror movies, primarily slasher, but a lot of occult and a lot of supernatural stuff too. Stephen King movies were always kind of my favorite. Beyond just horror, it was just good storytelling, like, and so they stuck out to me among all the other horror movies. Anything by King always stuck out because, like I said, in addition to just being scary as hell, the storytelling was just amazing. So I remember the original miniseries, was like, to me, was like the scariest thing when I was a kid. Like, that movie terrified me. Now I love it. Now I'm a huge fan of both versions. So that's, I think, early on how I got into it. And then obviously I grew up in like the mid 90s to the early 2000s. And if you rewind the clock and you see what kind of cartoons were playing on Cartoon Network in the early 2000s, it's no wonder that we're all so traumatized now. Because you had Courage the Cowardly Dog, The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. Just some really dark stuff was like influential in our childhoods, at least my brother and some mine. So it's no wonder that we all kind of grew up to be like these horror loving, Halloween obsessed, traumatized millennials.
So let's go back to Stephen King for a minute there. So did you, I'm guessing like with a lot of people, younger people, kind of, you get into it, you see the movies before you start reading the books. So after you started getting into the books, what were your thoughts on some of the movies then?
Yeah, so let me think about this, because you're right. King is one of those people, more people have probably watched a King movie than read a King book, because his books are a little bit, they're hard to access, I guess, because the way he writes is very weird. Because I went to school to be a writer. King breaks almost all the rules of writing, or the rules of writing. He has made a career just doing his own thing, to the point where writing professors will tell you not to copy Stephen King. Like, copying Stephen King is not a formula for success in the writing world, because you're not Stephen King. You can't do it. He can do it. He's earned the right to do it. Nobody else can do it until you establish yourself. Then you can do whatever you want. But I'm trying to think. I started, my first King book that I ever read was Cujo. And I'd actually never seen the movie for Cujo. Well, I think I saw the opening scene. But I read the book, and I loved the book. That was the first King book I ever read. And then I didn't read any more King until, like, I got a Stephen King collection for Christmas. Like, I got Carrie, Salem's Lot, and The Shining all in, like, one super book. Nice. And I read that whole thing. And I mean, those three books are like, that's quintessential starting material for King. After I read those three books and I watched the movies, Carrie is pretty good still. Carrie is still pretty good. Salem's Lot, even though it's iconic, it's nothing compared to the book. Like, it's just because the way, the time it was made and the things that are in the book, you just couldn't duplicate. But it's still an iconic horror movie. And if you're a horror fan, you haven't seen Salem's Lot, what's wrong with you? Like, go watch Salem's Lot. Like, it's iconic. The Shining still is amazing. It's probably still top 5 horror films for me. That's as much because of Stanley Kubrick as it is because of Stephen King. Even though anybody who's kind of familiar with The Shining, the book and the movie, will know that they're pretty different. The Shining is the only horror book I've ever read, even though I love horror. The Shining is the only horror book that I've ever read that actually scared me. So
did you watch that second version of The Shining?
No, I need to. Yeah, because it's Stephen King's The Shining, not Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, and it's
that one was a lot more like the book. What did you think? I mean,
I haven't watched it.
Okay,
I heard it's more accurate. I'm okay with the Stanley Kubrick version, because Stanley Kubrick version also leads right into Dr. Sleep, which is it's a modern Stephen King adaptation that I really love. I think it's actually super overrated or underrated. It for some reason didn't get a lot of traction, but it's probably one of the best modern horror movies that I've seen in a while.
I was blown away with that because my expectations were kind of nothing. But I mean, even if I had high expectations, I felt I still would have loved it.
Yeah, it was good. No, I loved it. I didn't know what to expect going in. I haven't read Dr. Sleep yet. I'm so bogged down with other King books right now. I'm wrapping up The Dark Tower right now. If we want to talk about a Stephen King adaptation that I absolutely hate, we can talk about the Dark Tower movie. You know, with the exception of Matthew McConaughey's portrayal of the Man in Black, I hate that movie.
I don't think I've heard anybody say that they like it ever. So it seems to be kind of the universal.
No, I mean, for general audience's sake, it'd be like trying to take the Harry Potter books and combine them into one movie. You know, it's the same thing. They tried to combine 7 very different books into one movie that's not even a rated R movie, and it's a Stephen King adaptation. Like, of course that's not going to succeed.
Yeah. So let's see here. What else were we going to talk about? I'm looking at my notes here.
I can talk about movies and King all day.
I have this problem where if I see a movie first, I can't read the book because too much of it is already painted out for me.
Right.
And if I start looking at the book, I'm like thinking about the way everything looks in the movie, and I can't do it.
I thought I was going to have that problem with when I read The Shining, because by that point the movie had already been so imprinted on me. The issue is that Jack Torrance in The Shining, the book, is nothing like Jack Torrance in the movie. Like, not even remotely the same. So when I started reading it, I couldn't see Jack Nicholson anymore, because I'm like, this isn't the same guy. This dude is actually a loving father. He deals with alcoholism. The book is about alcoholism. It's about Stephen King's alcoholism, but not in the malicious, psychotic way that it's made out in the movie. You know, it's very clear in the book that he's possessed by the hotel, that he's not having a mental breakdown. He's possessed by the hotel. And so the movie kind of goes more of the cabin fever route. So in that way, I didn't have too much of an issue with it. That But in the Pet Cemetery, Jeb, is that his name? Jeb, the guy, the old guy, the neighbor.
That was played by Herman Munster
In the first movie, in the original,
yeah.
in the good one, not that shitty remake. That I hate. It's another remake I actually don't like, because it diverts so far from the book. And the book is so good. Like, the book is like one of the best horror books of all time. I think it's considered to be like one of the best horror stories of all time.
Yeah, oh yeah.
The new movie like diverted so much from it, but yeah, the old fella, like, when I read the book, I do picture him, but that's only because they followed the book pretty closely, and that guy, he speaks exactly how King writes him speaking in the book, with the accent, that upper Maine accent, you know.
Yeah, that accent was always kind of. I could never figure out what it was supposed to be, but
Yeah, it's, if you have to live from Maine, you got to be from Maine to understand it, I guess, because King, that accent pops up a lot. King, that's another thing King does that you're not supposed to do technically in fiction writing, is you're not supposed to write accents. You can describe an accent and say, like, oh, he spoke with a blah 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 accent. King goes as far as to actually like try to spell out the accent, like,
okay.
with the yeah, you know, the yeah, up the road there, you know, like he does the whole, he'll write it out that way. And I did that actually in an early draft of Spider Queen. Gus, one of the movers, has a pretty heavy Minnesota, not, it's like a southern Minnesota, it's like, I call it the Minnesota drawl or the Midwest drawl. It's like, it's southern, but it's not southern.
Right.
And he speaks with kind of that accent, and one of my editors was very adamant that I get rid of the accents. He's like, don't write the accents.
I suppose I can see how some people might not be able to pick up on that if they've never heard it, or
Yeah, it's for, if you're not used to it, it's really off-putting, or it takes, I don't know, it slows the reading down, because you have to like slow yourself down enough to like understand it.
right.
But King's really all about that immersion in what he writes. So I tried it, didn't work out. At least my editor didn't like it. I guess I don't know how audiences would feel about it, because it never made it to the final copy. So
Right. So what's all right, what do you think is the best adaptation of a King book on the screen? The absolute best one, would you say? I wouldn't say not necessarily what you think is the most faithful, but what do you just think was the best?
Oh, like what was the most successful? Well, I mean,
or more like your favorite. Which one do you think is the best?
Okay, got it. Let's see.
Make it the film.
Oh man, that's such a hard question, because like I said, The Shining, even though it wasn't faithful throughout the whole way, it's Stanley Kubrick, who's like one of my
that's
favorite.
His movie all the way.
Yeah, it's like he's one of my favorite filmmakers of all time, and so it's really hard for me not to say The Shining. But if I'm trying to be like faithful to King, probably It. I would say It is, for as hard of a book, I'm going to give it to It, and the reason is that is a really hard book to adapt.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you've read it, but there is some stuff in there. Oh man, I mean, he has a lot of really long books, but that one is just so full of so much material and so much just really out there stuff. Like, I mean, it works more as like a cosmic horror, like an H.P. Lovecraft type book than anything else. And you know, it kind of gets simplified down to like, oh, it's just a murder monster clown, but it's so much more than that. Like, there's so much more going on. That's, you know, it gets real metaphysical and real spiritual, so the first adaptation I thought did a really good job of showcasing kind of like the point of like how it shape changes into your worst fears. And then I actually think the remake does a pretty good job too. I think they kind of lost it in the sequel. I know some people disagree with me on that. I'm not a big fan of It Part 2, because I thought it went kind of off the rails. They tried to adapt certain things from the books, that probably shouldn't have been adapted, like the giant Paul Bunyan.
Oh yeah,
that's in the book. It works way better in the book than it does CGI'd on screen. But that's, you know, so I'm gonna give it to it. I think it is pretty good. The original Pet Sematary is really solid.
that still holds up pretty well today too. I
It
think.
does, yeah. Like I still get kind of freaked out when the kid gets hit by the semi truck. Like that's still,
Oh yeah.
gets me, my anxiety just spikes every time that happens.
I don't think anybody likes to watch that scene.
No. Yeah, I'd say it and the original It miniseries and the original Pet Sematary. Honorable mention though should go to more of a modern one. So the Outsider, which is a kind of a newer Stephen King book, got adapted for HBO Max,
Okay.
and that was a fairly faithful adaptation. It's a shorter book compared to his other stuff, so to adapt it into like a 10-episode miniseries, they had to add some stuff to it that was kind of unnecessary. But beyond like what they added, they didn't really take anything away, which was really cool. So that was, as far as faithful adaptations go, that was pretty faithful, which I thought was pretty great. So if you guys haven't seen it, The Outsider on HBO Max is really good.
Bouncing back to Kubrick a bit there, I think that the one book that I actually did read after I'd seen the movie a million times was A Clockwork Orange.
Mm-hmm.
And that was mostly because I knew that the book went a little bit further than the movie.
Yeah.
So, and you know, somehow I saw that movie when I was 12, and that explains a lot of my fucking problems.
Yeah.
But I guess what other Kubrick stuff were you kind of influenced by, or are you into?
Well, Clockwork Orange for sure. I mean, that has some of the best cinema photography that I've probably ever seen in a movie. Full Metal Jacket is another one. That is, you know, like I think I watched that on repeat as a kid, which, you know, it's weird that I ended up in the military after watching that. I think it made me want to go more.
Jeez.
I don't know why, because I'm sick, I guess. But I know, like, that was a movie I watched I was shown to try and dissuade me from joining. But it just made me want to go more. Yeah, so I mean, those are my top three: The Shining, Clockwork Orange, Full Metal Jacket. He's got a couple others that I'm trying to. I can't believe I didn't think of this one first. 2001: A Space Odyssey is just a ride. Oh my God, it's such
so
a
bleak.
ride. It's just so bleak. Yeah, and then watching that, if you watch that, just for the movie buffs in here, if you watch that, if you can handle another movie after that, watch Interstellar close to that one. It's really weird because Interstellar kind of worked, like, by Christopher Nolan. Interstellar kind of works as like a soft sequel to that movie. It's really weird because a lot of the same imagery pops up in both of them, and the same themes pop up to where they could almost be sequels to each other. Or one could be like Interstellar could be a sequel to 2001. But yeah, what a great sci-fi movie.
I can't believe I can't remember the title of this. The one that was subtitled or How I Learned to Love the Atomic Bomb, and it had the Slim Pickens character in there.
Oh,
the fuck.
Yeah, I'm drawing.
I'll have to edit that out because I can't remember that. That was a great one too. That was a darker comedy. Well, shit. Let's see here. Zoom is gonna kick us off in a minute or two because I'm too cheap to pay for it.
Yeah, understandable.
So I guess anything you want to leave us with before we cut it off here?
Yeah. Horror fans, please, May 1st, go out. Just May 1st through May 5th, like any time in that 5-day period, please get your copy of In the Web of the Spider Queen. If you like dark fantasy, if you like horror, if you like violence and action, and if you like books where characters don't have plot armor, this is the book. Because nobody is safe. Don't get attached. This is the culmination of 3 years of work for me. It's also the culmination of my entire life as a horror fan, and it's the first of many to come. You know, my long-term goal is to have a book out every year until I physically can't write books anymore. So this is where it all is going to start. Everything starts with this book, and everything ripples from this. So if you're going to be a horror fan and claim to be a horror books fan, then you're not going to want to miss this, because this is going to be the start of a whole new chapter of horror fiction.
Well, I think everybody in the group is going to be interested in it based off of what you said. So thank you again for chatting with us. Everybody out there, stay safe and stay weird.